Welcome. Anish Chandy is a literary agent. What exactly does that mean? Most authors either do not know their way around the business of publishing, distributing, and promoting their books, or are not particularly interested in that kind of thing. Anish has built a network that enables this. He has his pulse on the market that helps him give authors an expert view on what they should be doing and finds new opportunities for them, whether it's in books, serials, films, or digital platforms. How did Anish find his way to establishing Labyrinth, a name that would be applicable to most career journeys? Because he's worked at both Infosys and Penguin. This is what we'll explore in our conversation today. This is episode 88 of My First Job, the podcast that covers engaging career journeys, and every single one is full of twists, turns, and insights. I am Venugopal Nair, the host of the podcast and CEO of Ideascape Communications, an advertising agency into branding, creative, and design. So settle in, sit back, and enjoy the conversation, or put on your headphones and clock your step. Anish, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Venu, and I look forward to a freewheeling chat.
Great. So, what did you start off with? What were you doing at Infosys?
Uh, okay, I mean, I have to sort of scroll back a little bit. I did not actually start with Infosys. When I was fresh out of college, I
Okay.
was born is in Bombay. I went to Sydenham College there. My first job was actually with a tire company, selling
Okay.
selling truck tires in rural Maharashtra.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
the one thing that it taught me was I don't want to sell truck tires in rural Maharashtra. Uh,
Okay.
After that, I decided I was going to get an MBA because I was kind of obsessed with this idea that I want to move to the US.
Okay.
Um, More than sort of following a specific vocation, I just knew I had to go to America because the American dream was sold to me successfully by many Hollywood movies. Um, and I was obsessed with the, and I loved movies. I actually grew up
Right.
behind a movie theater in Bombay,
Right.
uh, legendary single screen movie theater in Bombay called Maratha Mandir. Uh,
Yes.
and, and I think DDLJ is still playing
Isn't that
there.
the place where Sholay ran for an
No,
umpteen number of years?
that was
No.
down the road.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
there was a
Yeah.
succession of these single screen theaters. There was Maratha Mandir, Minerva, Apsara, Novelty.
Okay. Okay.
I used to watch all of those movies. So I just knew I had to go to America. And after the tire company, then I worked with a startup. This we're talking about 20 years ago, just to kind of get a sense of what does it mean to be in a business, you know. Um, and then I got an MBA, and then I joined Infosys. I mostly joined the IT industry because it was the shortest, like a shortcut to moving abroad, more than
Right.
me being passionate about software or data, you know. So that's how I landed up in Infosys. Then I moved to Chicago. I was there for about 3 years. um, I was a sort of a consultant on various projects, doing regular IT consulting stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what did the job involve? Was it projects that Infosys obviously were off-site or on-site for some of these projects?
Yeah. So I was on site for the majority of my career. I spent some time in Cardiff, and then I moved
Okay.
to Chicago. I was in Chicago for about 3 odd years, and it was a project like a typical IT project where it's sort of technology and data. I was in a department called business intelligence. It was fine. It was a very peaceful existence, and it was great. My
But the
my
American dream didn't live up to its billing. What you
No,
had
it,
kind of
I loved America. I loved
okay.
living there. It's just that
Okay.
I had this reverse epiphany. There are tons of people who have this epiphany, right? This is what I do want to. This is what I want to do with my
Right.
life. I had a reverse epiphany that this is what I don't want to do with my life. You know, so yeah. So
I
I
love
love.
that phrase,
Yeah,
reverse.
yeah. So So I loved America and continue to love America, but I did not want to be in IT anymore.
Okay.
And Infosys is a great company. I learned a lot. It's just that it's a IT by itself is a fairly conservative culture. My interests lay elsewhere. Um, yeah, it was. So I decided I'll give up a fairly cushy existence and then move back to India to find what my it is, and I didn't know what that it is.
Okay.
Yeah, so I kind of moved back as an experiment, but I also moved back before I turned 30. That was also kind of important, I felt at
Right.
the time. So yeah.
So what happened in between after Infosys? What were the kind of things that you tried your hand at to figure out what you wanted to do?
So I didn't really have a plan, okay, but
Yeah.
it might sound a bit foolhardy, but it's actually not as foolhardy as it sounds because I've spent time working abroad for 4 years, which means I've built a decently large size corpus, which gives me a runway to experiment. Okay.
Right.
In any case, I was not a big believer that by so and so age you need to get to so and so point in your life. These are just
Yeah.
societal constructs which I had no interest in.
Right.
And anyway, I felt like financially I was kind of ahead of the game at that point. Okay, just through sheer being at the right place at the right time. I was not a
Right.
particularly talented software person or whatever. Um,
Right.
so I moved back with the idea of not settling for anything until I find what that it is for me, until I find the reason why I am here on planet Earth. So
Okay.
then I dabbled in lots of things. I kind of spent about 15 to 18 months um, experimenting. I traveled a lot. I did some mountaineering course. I did some meditation course. I did a long road trip from Bangalore to Bhutan, which had no end date. It could have just gone on forever with a close friend of mine. Then at one point, a friend called me and he said, "Look, how long are you going to be wandering? Why don't you move to Delhi?" I had no connection to Delhi. I live in Delhi now. "Why don't you move to Delhi and we'll start a bakery together?" Because his wife at the time was a baker. So that's how I moved to Delhi and we began this whole baking enterprise. I'm the greatest cake taster in the world, by the way. For that baking enterprise, I can't bake, but I was supposed to be on the business side of it. But I've tasted
Okay.
so many cakes, I can tell you exactly even today how good or bad a cake is.
So it's going to be very hard to serve you a cake that you really find
That is true.
unique.
That is true.
Yeah.
I'm a cake
Yeah.
quality expert. So yeah, but
Okay.
so working with friends was great. That was a very brief stint, and then I happened to meet someone in in Delhi who worked in publishing, and we
Okay.
sort of bonded over books. And then she suggested, "Have you ever thought of working in the books business?" And I've said I've loved books all my life. I'm a lifelong reader, books and movies both. But I've never really thought of working in publishing. It's never occurred to me because at the time, like most people think, a book is a relationship between an author and a reader. You don't generally think of what's the publisher doing here.
Exactly.
You know there's a publisher, but you almost are thinking of a publisher as some kind of a glorified printer if you're not in the business, right?
Yeah.
So I said, "Oh, I've never really thought of it." And then she said, Penguin was hiring at the time, and they generally don't hire laterally. So again, it
Okay.
was right place, right time, serendipity. I said, "Sure." I met with them. They seemed to think I was bright. It was actually another experiment in a series of experiments, except this experiment never ended. And books was my it, and who knew?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I was to just go over what you just told me,
Hmm.
you allowed yourself to drift,
Yeah.
but in a certain space where you said, okay, I'm increasing the number of things that I do and the places that I go to and the people that I meet.
Yeah,
So happenstance at that point, exactly as you mentioned,
yeah.
being in Delhi, you come across somebody who then tells you that, hey, why don't you look at it? It's this relationship with books. I think you put it beautifully when you said that the publisher, most authors think, is some kind of glorified printer. I'll come back to that at some point. But I also wanted to understand what kind of books you grew up on.
I grew up on all kinds of books.
Okay.
I've been reading since I was a child. Initially, it was these abridged versions of these classics, Prince and the
Okay.
Pauper and Dickens and, Mutiny on the HMS Bounty and War of the Worlds and stuff like that. You used to get these abridged versions of these classics on the footpath of Bombay, and that's
Okay.
where we used to get it from.
Okay.
One side used to be text and the other side used to be an illustration.
Okay.
um, I think that's a great way to actually start reading books. And then I moved
Right.
on to, let's say, Sidney Sheldon and Jeffrey Archer, and then I moved on to better literature like Salman Rushdie and V.S. Naipaul and stuff like that. And then biographies. So I used to read across the board. I used to read philosophy, but I also was very cognizant of the fact that I I don't want to be one of those people who has no money, okay, and says I'm sitting under a tree and reading a book. I didn't want to be that person, which
Okay.
is why I felt I needed a corporate job. I needed an MBA, a corporate job in America, and all of that. So I wanted to have a good time in general in life, and at the same time pursue my hobbies. So it wasn't one of those martyrdom people, that for the love of art.
I'll do anything for a passion.
Yeah, I will eat Maggie and drink Old Monk and sit under a tree and read a book. That was not what I wanted to do.
Okay. Now, what did your career in books, where did it begin? What are the first things that you did when you joined the publishing house?
So Penguin hired me in a position called a commissioning editor. A commissioning editor essentially will think of ideas that could become a book and then reach out to people who could write that book. And I was a non-fiction commissioning editor. I started out with business books, then I slowly moved to other genres. Um, so either I could reach out to people, or I could reach out to an agent, or someone could reach out to me, and then we figure out, okay, you could write this book. So I was looking for domain experts. Could be a CEO of a company, could be someone who's great at, let's say, stock markets, and have them write these books. So their main criteria was they were domain experts and they could write in clear English. It did
Okay.
not need someone who was, a high thinking individual who could write wonderful prose. That is not what my genre required. So that's what I did. So this specific genre tends to be a money spinner for a publisher, and it continues to be one.
Okay. So, what is it that business books tend to be anchored around? Is it a particular domain? Is it about the self help kind of thing?
Yeah.
Is it
Self-help is closer to it. So someone reading it should derive some utility from it. The book has to be useful. These aren't books that are going to go and win the Nobel Prize or Booker Prize or whatever. These are books that the author comes in with a built-in audience. If it's a CEO
okay?
of a large company, there'll be a large network. You know that this author's network is already going to purchase the book, and then you put it out in traditional media, social media, wherever, and then you will find, and then you are basically saying, buy this book and you will become rich, or buy this book and you'll get further ahead in your career. It is that it started out with that kind of genre.
Okay. Being in the industry and with the amount of digital books that have now come in, and Kindle has created this kind of schism between the ebook and the regular book, where you have aficionados of both.
Sure.
What is your take as an insider on what the entry of Amazon has meant to the book publishing world in general?
So there are two parts to this. There is the e-commerce platform, which is a distribution platform to buy books. and then you have the Kindle. So ebook readers in India have not taken off at any. There's been no sort of scale, and multiple players have tried. It continues to be like 2 to 4% of print. India is firmly a print market. Okay. Amazon has completely changed the distribution game by making it very efficient, um, because of all the pin codes that they service. At the same time, it has led to sort of a collapse in the brick and mortar store business. But from a reader point of view, Amazon has been great, where a reader can get any book at the click of a button. Um, Now, different entities have been affected positively and negatively by the entrance of a large e-commerce player, but that is bound to happen. But Amazon has been, I would say, a disruptive force, positively and negatively, in the business.
Okay. And how do you see this playing out? Or is it that certain markets are more partial to, digital publishing as opposed to Indian markets, which you said is largely still print? Do you see that change over time, or how are you seeing this movement?
I don't see it changing because ebooks have been in India now for over a decade. So it's not like it has just started. So now there's enough data to prove out that India is a print market. There'll be other formats like audiobooks might probably grow, but I don't see ebooks growing in leaps and bounds anytime soon.
Okay. As a person working in the industry, how would you make your decisions on what is the flow of books? What kind of how will you allocate an annual publishing cycle to
Hmm.
various genres?
So it's a combination of market demand and
Okay.
personal interest. Okay, so the market today, for example, demands a lot of narrative nonfiction, self-help, biographies, political books. So if that's what publishers want, that's what, as a literary agency, that is what we look to sort of serve them. At the same time, I might say that, look, I am personally interested in true crime. So I might decide to rep a few authors who are in the true crime genre. So you could say 80-20, maybe 80% allocated to what the market wants and 20% is personal preferences.
Okay.
It also depends
And
what kind of talent one encounters.
absolutely. So, how does this entire business work today, in the sense that publishing houses get a constant stream of, from so-called want to be authors, or there's a set of people who have published and then got to a certain position, and there are the bestsellers who are well known, who's the moment you say announce that this person is coming out with a new book, it's all well sold. What is that tier like? I think the thinnest one would be the well known authors, right?
For sure. But again,
Yeah.
even within well-known authors, demand fluctuates. So, because people's preferences change unpredictably. So you could have a famous author, but suddenly the next book may not sell. You will get that
Okay.
initial offer. So it kind of mirrors the movie business a little bit, where an established hero could have a flop. And at the bottom of the pyramid, obviously, there is this massive population of people who have not been published, who want to be published, who are constantly pitching agents, publishers, and hoping for that big break. And in the middle, you have these authors who have been published, they are not bestsellers yet, they're hoping to break out, and they're hoping to not fall into that last year where they go from published authors to back to we are struggling to get published again.
That's an interesting point about books, even well established authors having a flop. So, what happens when a book doesn't do well? Is it that the publishing house and the author get together and then they try and figure out what hasn't worked? Or is it that the author goes back and then comes up with a fresh subject? Or how do things work?
Both happen. So, it's not a business that is very. I mean, people have access to data, but people don't tend to sit and analyze data as much as they probably should. So an author could go back to the drawing board and come back with another concept. The publisher could supply another concept, or the publisher could say, I don't want to publish this author anymore. The author could say, I don't want to publish with this publisher anymore. It really is a question of demand, supply, market forces. If there's an agent there, the agent might offer advice to both parties. So it's like a free market, you know.
Okay. Now, when people are getting into the business,
Yeah.
what is your advice? I think when I came across some of your posts on LinkedIn, the
Hmm.
fact that your analysis is so clear and the fact that you've put it down point by point is something that I don't see very often,
Hmm.
because you get to hear of the publishing world. And like you said, at some point, this could be at places where publishers congregate, or you don't normally get to see people, whereas you're out in the open. Your posts on LinkedIn are very clear about who's the author, what kind of, and I see that as a very fresh way of introducing an author to the public, a view where you have a take on something that's published and that's neither a reviewer nor the author themselves.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, what is that space you're creating?
I think I'm just trying to create a space where there is clarity. Okay. That, here's an author, and this is the book that this author is introducing to the market via this publisher around this time period. Okay. Now it's up to you whether you want to buy it or no, because we are no longer living in an age where you can convince someone to buy a product or a service that they are not convinced about.
Okay.
So I'm like, look, you make your own decision. Okay. I'm never going to put out a post every week saying the book is here, buy it, buy it, it's available at 20%
Yeah.
discount. Nobody really cares about stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I
Yeah.
still see a lot of authors on all kinds of social media. They say stuff like, my book is available on a sale. Who cares? Nobody's bought it anyway. So then by putting it out on a sale, how is that going to help? You know?
Yeah.
You've not been able to convey what value your book offers to the world. Okay. Now, if you discount that by 50%, also it does not matter, because you have been ignored by the market, right? Now, even if you give it free, it won't matter. And I know tons of people have tried it. People
Yeah.
simply, because there are two things people have to spend when they buy a book. There's money and time. You know,
Yeah.
you're saying, okay, you got to give me $300 or 400 or 500 or whatever that number is, and you also have to give me 3 to 8 hours of your life. You know,
Yeah.
so that's a fairly big ask.
That's true.
Yeah,
And given that the number of people who read is not a very large percentage of any population.
yeah,
So, do you think that that is in some way inbuilt? Because, like you said, even I did childhood, I spent reading a lot, and that has continued, though not with as much frequency today as I would like. But you have grown up reading, and that is that a very small subset? Because then there is a uh, I don't know if this thing of getting more people to read, does that actually work? What has your experience been?
it is a small subset. It will always be a small subset. You will, I don't think you can convince a non-reader to become a lifelong reader. That may not happen
Yeah.
inorganically. Okay. If someone stumbles upon, so I think the publishing industry needs to continue to put out a large variety of books. Okay. And make them accessible in terms of distribution, price points, all of that. India has some of the lowest book prices in the world. So, and then it is up to the reader, okay, or the buying public, whether they want to buy this book out of whatever self-interest that they have. It could be because someone recommended it, it showed up on the social media feed or whatever. So
Yeah.
I don't think reading is ever going to become this great mass activity, especially in a country like India, because one of the unfortunate outcomes of our education system is that it successfully turns everyone off the idea of reading. Okay. Because of rote learning, right? Um,
Yeah.
I don't know why I learned trigonometry, okay, in school. Um, I I had no interest, but I had to learn it so that I could pass whatever 8th standard, right? But it kind of built a certain resentment towards reading, let's say, books with math in them, and I still don't.
Okay.
You know, so I sympathize with the public.
Yeah. That is always going to be a problem. Like you said, there will be people who uh, develop a lifelong distaste for books, which is sad
Yeah,
because that part of the population, you can never get them back. Which
yeah.
is where I'm wondering, why is it that some of us survive this?
I think some of us found a book
Yeah.
that was life changing, or at that point in time. Okay.
Right.
Um, and then one fell in idea with the love of books, and then frequency of reading obviously would keep changing, based on what is happening in one's life. You know,
Yeah.
I've never bought the idea that I don't have time to read.
Okay.
I've always had time. I've always had
Right.
time to do whatever I wanted. Okay.
Exactly.
And I'm not some genius. So, this idea that I don't have time, let's say, if you won the birth lottery in India, where you've grown up in a middle class or upper middle class home at a minimum, you had an English education, then look, in a country like India, life is laid out for you. Okay.
Yeah.
You can complain about lots of things, but you're generally not going to have a very tough time. Okay. And then it's up to you whether you want to find time for whatever you want to do, whether that is reading or hiking or running or whatever that is.
Okay. How has your own career trajectory been when
Hmm.
you stayed in publishing for a couple of years? What inspired or what led to the next move?
The next move was sort of a logical step, because publishing, I always wanted to run a business. I always wanted to turn entrepreneur, and I wanted to do it fairly quickly. So once I figured out that publishing is where I want to spend sort of the rest of my life, whether or the business of storytelling, whether that's books, movies, whatever. Once that was established, after I joined Penguin, and that is also because of the wonderful colleagues I had at Penguin, who were
Okay.
generous with their time and expertise, right? So it was a massively steep learning curve in a very pleasant work environment. Then the next logical step was, okay, now can I turn entrepreneur? Can I become my own boss? So that is essentially how it happened.
Okay. Now, when you said the steep learning curve,
Hmm.
are there some incidents, there are some things that came to your mind about, hey, this sort of realigned your thinking about how the business was, or your own moment of epiphany and not reverse epiphany?
So pretty early, one of the first books that so one of the ways you can publish a book is by acquiring the rights of a book that has been published in another country. Okay.
Okay.
There's this world famous anthropologist called David Graeber, okay, who
Right.
unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Recently.
So
Yeah.
he coined the phrase, "We are the 99%." When the Wall Street protests were happening, the 1% versus the 99%. And he wrote this fantastic book on the concept of debt.
Hmm.
Debt, the first 3,000 years, I think it was called. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So that book, when I joined Penguin, I think this probably happened in the first week that I joined Penguin. That book was,
Okay.
because I was a non-fiction guy there. It was offered to me by David Graeber through someone else, asking me if Penguin India would be interested in publishing this book in India. It was published in the US at the time, and I read it. I thought it was great, and then what you have to do is you have to make a case within the publishing firm. Why should we allocate time and money to publish this book in India? So I did that, and I did that in whatever capacity I could at the time, because I just joined the business. And kudos to Penguin that they let me do it, like a bit of a leap of faith. And then I had a brief conversation with Professor Graeber, and I actually, at some point, I told him I have no idea what I'm doing here. As in, I have no idea. I love your book, but I have no idea what it really means to publish you in India, and how to introduce your book to the Indian public. This is 2012, so social media wasn't what it was today. And he, out of his own generosity, he said, even I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time. So that was like this big moment, that you are this world famous rock star academic who's written this great book, and you are sort of telling me this. And then we published it, and the book really took off in India, and I think it's gotten reprinted multiple times. So I realized two things. I realized that I have a feel for this business,
Okay.
like almost taking to it like a duck to water. And the fact that I could deal with someone like him, on sort of equal terms in terms of publishing, not in terms of subject matter expert.
Right. Right.
And that gave me so much joy that I realized that I can now do this over and over again.
That's beautifully articulated, Anish, because it describes essentially what you get pleasure out of doing in terms of work.
Yeah,
For a lot of us, that's like a lifelong quest, which never finding out what really works.
I know, because people also don't. So let's say you land up in a job that is
Yeah.
lucrative, and you can make a living out of it. I think
Right.
most people focus on that idea too much, that hey, I'm making a living, but they don't focus on the idea of you're making a living out of what,
Yeah.
right? I was
Yeah.
making a living when I was in software or in IT consulting, right? I was making a living. I was making a living in America where I wanted to be, but I didn't really have an intuitive feel for or care enough about the technology or the IT world, you know.
Okay.
So I didn't want to be one of those people that I have this itch I need to scratch, but I will scratch it once I retire.
It doesn't work. Yeah.
That never appealed to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And often I think it's also in terms of risk, people understand a risk with money
Hmm.
and a risk with career. But things like this, they're almost loath to admit that they like certain things because in their mind, it doesn't pay enough
Yeah,
or whatever it is.
yeah, yeah,
So they say that there is no market there. I will not go there because this is giving me enough money. And
sure.
because of that, they're denying themselves so much of pleasure
Yeah,
and so much of inner satisfaction simply because they think it's not marketable.
that is true. And but I think that concept has been oversold to people. I think if
Yeah.
you are so when I transitioned from the IT world to the publishing world with a period in the wilderness, right? I went from what I was making to zero
Right.
to again making an income which was an 85% reduction from what I was making. Okay. But now it depends what I compare it to. Do I compare my publishing income to my period of wilderness, which is zero, or do I compare it to the IT world? So I initially I compared it to the IT world, and then I figured out, or I had enough faith that if I'm good at this, I will eventually make a lot more money than I was making in the IT world. So that transition took about 3 years after being in the books business. So including my period in the wilderness plus books business, I would say it was 4.5 years before I was back on par. You know, so one doesn't have to make those financial sacrifices.
Yeah. What you mentioned is such an important point, which I think is lost in the analysis because
Yeah,
taking the dip and then moving to something that you really enjoy
yeah,
and willing to experiment with that is not something that people are conventionally accustomed to doing
right.
because they assume that the world outside is I've managed to find my safe space and make enough money.
Yeah,
Now let me not so let me find pleasure and experiences and travel which they may not actually want at all. So they I wonder if at times they're holding themselves back to a large
everyone is.
extent.
So everyone is, unless they find that thing, that it which they are here for, whatever it is, whether they are a chef whether it's actually a banker who deep down should be a chef, you know, or a doctor who should be playing hockey, you know. um, People
Yeah.
hold themselves back also for societal reasons. I did not have that constraint. I did not have, my parents, for example, did not put any pressure on me. I never bought into the idea that people are going to care beyond a point. I had friends asking after my well-being, but at the end of the day, everyone has their own life to live, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then turning entrepreneur. So,
Hmm.
what was that process like, and what was the journey like? Was there any specific point at which you decided, or was it something that organically evolved?
I was thinking of the idea of turning entrepreneur anyway. Then Penguin went through a merger with Random House all over the world, including India. So that felt like a logical point to sort of leap off. There was this gap in the market where what was being pitched to the publisher and what the publisher wanted to publish, it felt like, you know, that gap could be bridged. The way publishing happens in the Western world is an author will typically not reach out to the publisher. It will always be through an agent.
Okay.
Um, so then I felt like I could turn agent. The agenting business was quite nascent at the time. There were a few agents. So I felt that business was going to grow. So that's how I started. And then a few years later, the whole book to movie adaptation business opened up suddenly after the streaming platforms came into India. So then they wanted bound scripts. A book was a good source for it. So then that opened up a whole new world where both my original loves of books and movies, they came coalesced together.
Converge.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So it was a happy
yeah.
happenstance of several favorable circumstances coming together.
At no
But
point
what
I
do you
made an
think?
Excel. No point did I make an Excel sheet saying this is going to be my revenue in year one and this is what will happen. And I did nothing of the sort. I thought there was an opportunity set out, and then the road will show itself. Yeah.
Okay. Do you still believe in that, Anish? Is that how you still run your company?
Pretty much. Now, obviously, we have data, right? We have now 10 years of data post turning entrepreneur. So
Okay.
I know by and large what's going to happen. Also, there always needs to be space for experimentation. Okay, that, you know,
Right.
so that there, it's like the VC business. How many bets can I take in a year? You know,
Right.
my bet taking will be predicated on a few factors. You know, what's happening in the market, what is the kind of talent that is walking through the door, and also how much can I work with this individual. You know,
Okay.
yeah,
So, which is the first book that you? I'd like you to take two things up. One
yeah.
is, how does this business work of agent? Is it that you have a set of authors based on references who come to you?
Mm.
And what are the kind of conversations that you have once you have decided that this particular book has potential?
So an author and an agent could begin their interaction through multiple circumstances. It could be a writer sort of cold pitching an agent. Uh, an agent could reach out to a writer. It could come through a reference. It could be an already published author who now wants a better deal or better treatment from a publishing firm. So everyone will come in with sort of different hopes and aspirations, talent levels. Then what we have to, as a firm, what we have to figure out is, do we want to bet on this concept and this individual? So
Okay.
then it could be like, okay, we think the concept is great, but this gentleman or this lady is going to be hard to work with. So then we'll probably pass. Okay. Or we could say, you know what, this person, we don't actually need to work. This person already has a fully fleshed manuscript and we think that is market worthy. So we could just go to market like that. Or we could say, you know what, there is this person has a germ of an idea. We could sit and work with this person, this writer, to figure out what is the best way to take this idea to market. Then we also have to figure out what is the commercial viability of it as a book, as a potential movie, as an audiobook? Can it be sold in other territories, in other languages? Do we want to have a long term relationship with this person, or is it like a one and done? You know, so these are all sort of considerations that come in, because the demand supply ratio is very asymmetrical. For every book that is published, there are 100 pitches, you know. So if it doesn't fit our matrix of, we want to work with this person, we're not going to take it on.
So you then look at a certain calendar and then say that you need to publish X number of books, get X number of deals. Is it something as you break down at that level, or is it something that you say you've understood the business enough to say that, okay, there'll be highs and lows?
No, so we don't restrict ourselves to X number of books or deals. We might have a year which is packed with books. We might have a year which is packed with movies. So it really depends on what we think the market is like,
Okay.
that year. Like the last couple of years have been more movie focused. The next couple of years might be a little more book focused, you know. So it could
Okay.
play out in any permutation and combination.
Okay. And audiobooks,
Hmm.
I'm not much of a fan of audio myself, though I love podcasts. But audiobooks, I somehow feel are, is it a growing category?
It's a growing category. It is growing unevenly, uh, but it will grow, and I think it will outpace ebooks in India.
Oh, wow,
Yeah.
that's a that's a revelation. Because why do you think that?
We can see the data, right? So a lot of our books have been converted to audiobooks, and every time a royalty statement comes in, we can see the number of listens have jumped, and that jump is fairly exponential. We are seeing that number of listens are like 20% higher, 30% higher, and we are not seeing that kind of growth in ebooks.
Okay, okay. So in the last from 2012 to 12 years in book publishing, the world has changed. There's a
Yeah.
lot more, the distribution has changed. Uh, what are the things that haven't changed?
What's not changed is people in India want to read books that explain India to them, you know,
Okay,
uh, in terms of a genre. Okay. What will never change is people want books when they want it at the lowest possible price possible, right? Which
okay,
is Jeff Bezos' philosophy of building Amazon. Formats will keep changing. Now there's been a lot of disruption in the movie world, where now people are not going to movie theaters as much because they're sitting at home and watching it on streaming platforms.
yeah,
But then you will have the odd breakout movie that will again draw people back into the theaters.
right,
So those trends will keep changing. But people want to read. People want to read, and they want to read stuff that explains the world better to them.
yeah. In fact, there used to be this thing of uh, holiday where I go to a beach, and at least in the West, that seems to be the case,
Yeah.
where I take a week off and then I take a pile of books. Now you just have to carry a Kindle. But so there
People
was
don't people don't take enough holidays in India, unfortunately.
that's also because I think we, as given our background and some of the middle class values that were there, it's almost as if idleness was it was never seen as leisure.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
but a
was
lot of
always seen.
yeah, but a lot of
Yeah.
life is then sort of running to stay at the same spot.
Yes. Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true. So when people come to you with asking for your advice on what they should do, or what are the kind of things that a person aspiring to get into public publishing
Hmm.
or into books as a business
Yeah.
should look out for?
So there, you could get into the business. There are multiple routes to it. You could either try to join a publishing firm as an employee. You could try to join a literary agency as an employee. You could try to become a freelance publicist. You could become a freelance editor. You could join the books distribution business. You could join an Amazon in the books category. So it depends where your interests lie. So if you want to be in the business of editing and curating a book, then obviously you have to be a reader. Okay,
Yeah.
that's the basic criteria. And then you apply, if you're starting out, then you apply as an intern, as an editorial assistant, and see, do you like this business? Unfortunately, pay scales at that level are very low. So if you say that I want to make money, then you should probably get an MBA and join a bank or a startup or whatever, but if you want to be in the books business, then it's probably going to be a few years of struggle at in the beginning few years, and then you see where your interest takes you and where the market takes you.
Okay.
But
Okay.
joining a publishing firm would be a good start.
Yeah. And typically, is there some kind of a qualification that publishing companies are looking for, or is it just that you have? It could vary. It could depend, like you said, on an interest in books in general.
Yeah. So best case scenario, you come with a literature background, but you don't need it. Okay.
Okay.
If you come in through a reference, and it does not have to be a very important reference. It could be a reference saying, would you be open to hiring this person as an intern? Wow, it's possible, it's doable. But that if you can't exhibit your love for books, okay, and that doesn't mean saying that I love this book, actually talking about book,
Very true. You
then
can't fake that love.
fake it. You can't. It's actually a hard to fake business that way. Then,
Yeah.
then yeah, if you can't exhibit that, then it's going to be hard. But if you can, then in general, you will be able to make your way at least into the business. Whether you stay or no, that will depend on other factors. And if the large publishers are not taking you, maybe a smaller one.
Okay. One of the things that's happened in India, Anish, is that the original chain of bookstores, at least in Chennai, there used to be Landmark, which
Yeah,
was a favorite place,
yeah,
which no longer exists. So, do
yeah.
you think there's a business model for smaller bookstores or combinations of coffee and books or something else, which could work?
Many people have tried it. I think there is a case to do it in maybe tier two cities,
Okay.
where it could be a refuge for people to meet. Um, maybe almost an escape from small town conservatism. Maybe go out on a date there, and books can become an excuse. But outside of that, it's a very challenging space to set up a bookstore, pay a high street rent, because you can't have a bookstore in the middle of nowhere. It has to
Yeah.
be in the heart of the
Yeah.
city.
Yeah.
But Crossword has done a great job with expanding in the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
One of the
So they
franchisee partners actually took over the business.
Okay. Okay. So they discovered something that was working. So obviously
Yeah.
they're
Yeah, but
expanding
they
on
were
that.
in the business. They were a franchise. They were the Pune-based franchisee, and they
Okay.
were in the business for many years. And then they figured out that they can run the business well. So now they own the brand and they run the business all over the country.
Okay. Okay. I came across this completely unusual. It, as far as I know, it exists only in Japan, where the publisher has only one book for 2 weeks. He has
Okay.
readings and he has this whole thing around it, which seems so completely
Yeah,
off the chart that it I don't know if it'll work anywhere else in the world, but Japan seems to be the place that gets away with doing stuff like this.
sure. But that's a cultural quirk, you know.
Yes, yes,
Um,
that's a
yeah,
yeah. It's not really got to do with the way the markets
yeah,
themselves operate.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so what has been the most satisfying part of being in the business, that you on a daily basis get to talk to people, have good conversations with people who are articulate, who have ideas, who have things to say?
That the most gratifying part of being in this business is that one is dealing with ideas and highly skilled people. So
Okay.
and my firm's role is to bring those ideas most effectively to market, right? So having those I've learned so much. I've learned so much. I've built friendships, lifelong friendships, and dabbled in other domains. I started angel investing because I met an author. I met someone who was writing a startup book, and then he showed me the ropes of that world.
Okay.
So that to me is the most joyful and gratifying part of being in this business. and hits and
Okay.
flops will keep happening. They don't
Yeah.
they don't really bother me in that sense. If a flop happens, it's not like I'm going to be morose. If a hit happens, it's not like I'm going to be overjoyed.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. The fact that you're willing to take the rough with the smooth,
yeah,
which at times is probably one of the things that holds people back, is
hmm.
that they want life to be very predictable, and
Yeah,
predictable in the way that they want it to move.
yeah,
Any deviations from the norm
yeah.
are difficult. So, what are some of the author experiences that you have had which are unusual or
I mean,
different?
that actually runs the gamut as you could imagine. Someone who I've met someone in jail. I've had an author while the book was being written was arrested. I've met a monk. I've met all kinds of authors. People in the army, bankers who would deep down want to be poets, and then chefs. One meets people from all walks of life. And a host of extremely colorful sort of characters. I I recently met someone who owns a exotic bird, and he's taught the bird to every time someone enters his house, the bird will start off with a spew of swear words at the person who walks in, right? And the more important the person, the more swear words directed at the person. So, you know, I've also seen people, because we obviously deal with a lot of public personalities. I've also dealt with a lot of people who are famous, but they in a personal space they're almost the exact opposite, both in good and
Okay.
bad ways, of what their public faces are. So at one level, we are also a custodian of secrets. So if I could publish everything that I have learned after meeting so many people, I'll have a bestseller and I'd probably be assassinated the next day. So, uh,
And you would collectively wipe out a whole set of relationships that you
yeah,
need
for
carefully.
sure, for
Yeah,
sure.
that's it.
So
Yeah,
it could be politicians, it could be actors,
yeah, yeah,
business
yeah,
people, entrepreneurs. Yeah,
yeah. No, that's the amazing part of human nature and interest, the varied,
yeah,
combinations that you get.
yeah,
Like you said, a banker who's a poet,
yeah,
guy who's in prison wanting to write some,
yeah.
story of what actually happened because they have their point of
Guy
view.
in prison who wanted to write a children's book.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So human nature is absurd.
Yeah. And I guess that's where the real interest is. It's almost like uh, you can't, at times, I think even songs have that effect, right? Or poems. You read some of them, and it's not easy to articulate what exactly you feel about it. But
Sure.
uh, you know that in some way you've been moved by listening to that.
Yeah,
So movies do that, books do that. And I think any creative art form does that.
yeah.
So today, what is your consumption pattern like? Is it more books, movies, or audio, or
It's all
personally, what are
not
you?
not as much audio, but it's sort of all of the above. Um, Books, movies, shows. I'm constantly consuming, both for work and for personal interest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nee, but what could be more satisfying, Anish? That your your work is essentially what you love doing the most. So you're
yeah.
doing it all the time. So very
And
few professions.
I genuinely, I'm flummoxed. Why don't more people do this? Why don't more people find what they love and find a way
Yeah,
to make money of it? No, now you could say that, oh, there's no market or this or that, or I actually love helping stray dogs and there is no money in helping stray dogs. Someone might say that, right?
yeah,
But this is all just made up stuff. If you put in enough effort, I think, if you're good enough and you truly love it, if that hunger is there,
yeah,
one will get there. And I hope through your podcast more people get there.
yeah. And this has been such a wonderful conversation because I don't think we followed a linear format at any point. It
Yeah,
wasn't as if I was trying to get Where did you go from here to here to here? Because that invariably gets like it's like passing milestones on a road.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's not the milestone itself is not the point, which I
yeah,
think is
yeah,
what people miss out on.
yeah.
So,
This whole, I mean, I'll add a slightly, which might be seen as a counterintuitive or a controversial take. I just don't believe in this idea of work-life balance. Okay,
okay.
if you find, I think the idea of work-life balance is a coping mechanism. Okay, where you are in a job and in a life that you don't really like. Okay, so which is why you've come up with this idea. One has come up with this idea that I'm going to take 2 days off and I'm going to protect my time, and that Saturday and Sunday is sacrosanct. You're actually not doing anything on that Saturday and Sunday. You're probably, you're whatever, you're, instead of that, why don't you make a choice that I will find what I want, I will make a life out of it. And then if I want to work on that Sunday, I will. If I don't want to work on that Monday, I won't. If I want to take 2 months off, I will. If I want to work 15 months straight, I will. So instead of, coming up with these made up constructs, uh, I might, what, this year, if we are in August, this year I have worked for 6 months. I've taken 2 months off. Okay. But it is very possible in the 6 months that I worked, I have worked on Sundays, and it's very possible, and the 2 months off I have not worked. You know, I
Right.
feel that is a lot more natural than saying that okay, Friday has arrived, I'm going to be happy, and now it is Sunday night, and now I'm sad that Monday is beginning. You know, I just don't understand that way of functioning.
Okay. Great, Anish. What a wonderful take on life and on careers.
Mm.
Thank you for coming on the show. I've not realized the time pass, and
Such
I
a pleasure,
learned a
sir.
lot
Same here.
while you were speaking.
Mm.
So, and I hope the people listening in will draw the lessons from work and life that you have. That it's not only counterintuitive, it is also extremely logical, but
Yeah,
somehow that logic is lost in today's world.
yeah.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Such a pleasure, Venu. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, wonderful. That was Anish Chandy, and he spoke to us about a life as a literary agent, which opened up so many doors and so many opportunities about how not just a career in publishing or in literary pursuits, but so much more that is possible. Thank you for listening. And next week, we'll be back with another guest, another show. And here's to a happy week ahead. Thank you.